Most estimates put the number of current human trafficking victims at 27 million. Even though tens of millions are trafficked worldwide, only around 46,000 victims were identified in 2012. So what can be done to solve this global problem? Joining me now is someone who has been at the forefront of this fight against human trafficking since 2007. David Batstone is the co-founder and the president of the Not for Sale campaign and a professor of ethics and social justice at the University of San Francisco. David, welcome to The Heat. 27 million is a staggering number. I looked online. That's the population of Saudi Arabia. I mean, this is a huge global problem. How do you combat it?
Yeah, not only is it prolific, Mike, but it's also geographically extensive. It's everywhere. I discovered human trafficking in my own backyard here in San Francisco, a restaurant that had trafficked young teenage kids from the country of India into the United States for the purpose of forced labor. From there, I went around the world and I discovered that it was really in every corner. It's in everybody's backyard. So there are ways to actually address the problem. It's going upstream from where the bodies are, drowning and flailing. But it does require compassion at the end of the river, and it requires really strategic intervention upstream.
Now, David, you're in this restaurant. I've heard you tell the story. You went there, you liked eating there. You never once suspected that these people were trafficked into this country. So what are some telltale signs people should look for? Because it's happening everywhere, isn't it?
It is happening everywhere. And if in your community there are people who you feel whose movement is being restricted, if they if it seems like they are being kept in, if the barbed wire in a compound, for instance, is bent in to keep people in rather than getting out, bars on windows, if indeed it looks like you're at a restaurant and someone's preventing you from talking to people who wash the dishes or serve the tables, it really is something that we should be more mindful of. I remember when we first started back in 2007, it was almost shock when I told people that human trafficking happened. And fortunately, there's more media coverage and there's more films that are being raising the issue. But really, people should be watching in their own communities that indeed it's possible that people are being enslaved and forced to do labor against their will.
And you do get a lot of tips from ordinary citizens, don't you?
No, absolutely. That's probably the number one conduit for law enforcement, being able to identify that victims are being exploited. It's through common citizens who are simply alert to what's going on in their own region, their own backyard, and alerting authorities.
I've heard the three P's. You've heard them as well, I'm sure: prevention, protection, prosecution. Is there a failure on all three fronts, would you say?
Absolutely. I wish I could argue otherwise, but first it was a problem of awareness that people didn't know how to identify, even law enforcement. I remember when Not for Sale first started, we actually had to wear hidden cameras and go undercover because we couldn't get local law enforcement to take seriously our tips. Fortunately, that has evolved, and law enforcement is being trained. They're being more, they're ready and equipped to deal with the problem. But really, there's not enough prevention. And I suppose this is where people who have a concern about human trafficking, they say, well, what can I do? And they're looking for a way to get involved. And beyond awareness, I think it really requires much more strategic and comprehensive solutions than one individual can take on alone, or a government can take on alone. It really requires cross-sector, that is, private sector, corporations, working with government, working with common citizens, to create new models, new solutions. It really is going to require some innovative thinking.
What's the biggest misconception about human trafficking?
The biggest misconception about human trafficking is that people are taken around the world. Young girls from South Korea into Washington, D.C., or young boys from Guatemala into Texas. Most human trafficking happens within 10 miles of where a person is born. So it's forced labor, slavery in agricultural fields, brick kilns, rug mills all over the world. Really, it's a problem that afflicts some countries because of the fact that they don't have a rule of law. And it also affects other countries because of the fact that they can take advantage of immigration laws.
Your organization has implemented international projects to provide support and aid to survivors and people who are at risk to be trafficked. You've targeted specific countries. Can you talk about those countries and why you selected them?
Yeah, we work fairly extensively around the world, in Romania, in the Netherlands, in South Africa. We work in Thailand, we work in India, we work in Peru. And we really have chosen projects based on several factors. One is a high exploitation index, so there's a lot of opportunity for people to be taken advantage of. The second is that we have found people almost more coincidentally or serendipitously. We found people who are really courageous, doing great things, but don't have much support. So if we can find the right team or individual who's working in an area where there's high vulnerability, rather than take someone from San Francisco and airmail them and drop them in, what we do is we surround that person within their own community. So the project we have in northern Thailand we started with was this remarkable woman that rescued hundreds of children out of slavery, but she was living in an open field. So we built a village around her. We created other support staff around her. So today, she's a leader for the fight against human trafficking in her country with our support.
You mentioned Thailand. It brings to mind the case in El Monte, California, back in the 90s, where these, I think it was 72 Thai women, and it was a cul-de-sac, a normal place, and yet they were basically chained to their sewing machines, which I think gets to the heart of another issue. The UN Global Report on Trafficking in Persons has identified 134 products in 74 countries produced through forced labor and child labor. Are we addicted to slavery through our own consumerism?
Well, yeah, it's a double-edged coin or double-edged sword, Mike, because on the one hand, we want to get cheaper products. We want to save money. And so we're all looking for a bargain. But I think there's a disconnect between the fact of how those products are made so cheaply. I'm really convinced that no one wants to wear someone's suffering. I want to consume someone's tragedy when I have my coffee in the morning. And I don't want to trot on their dreams with my shoes. But how do I know? How would I know that the products I made, that I consume, were made in a way that enhanced the lives of the people who made them? For that reason, Not For Sale created a whole index. We did research on products, and we created an app that you can go into a store, you can scan the barcode of a product, and you can see a grade like you get in school, A, B, C, D, F. If a candy bar, a chocolate bar has an A, well, that's a great product. It's enhancing the lives of the people who pick the cacao beans, who process the chocolate. On the other hand, if a chocolate bar gets an F, why would I want to eat that chocolate? Why would I want to consume someone's tragedy? So it's creating that kind of link, that personal link to the products that you and I consume every day.
Some of these businesses, though, claim ignorance. I just didn't know.
Yeah.
Are you buying that? And how do we hold these businesses accountable?
Well, increasingly, we're trying to make it easier for companies to have transparency around where their products are made. I think some companies legitimately say we don't know, and we're trying to provide them the opportunity to do so. I'm really thrilled that my own home state of California passed a law last year called the California Transparency Act that requires every company of significant size or revenue that they have to disclose how the products are made. It's not even compliance around, well, you have to make a product in a certain way, but you have to let the public know where you're manufacturing or where you're sourcing your product. I believe that should be a federal law. I think companies all over the world should be held to that standard.
David, you're in a brutal profession in a sense because we see so many of these terrible stories. What keeps you going? And we've only got about 30 seconds, and I know this is probably a 10-minute conversation, but what is it that gets you up every morning?
I tell you, Mike, every year I take my own boys with me to Thailand, and these kids that have been rescued 7 years ago, we just go and hang out with them. We do drama, music, art. We have what we call a free-to-play camp. All kids should be free to play. Some of those kids that I met in an empty field 7 years ago, having been rescued but nowhere to lay their head, today they're going to university. They're remarkable kids. They're healthy. These Thai kids have a future. What inspires me is to see kids who at one point were enslaved, today have a future.
David Batstone, Fighting the Good Fight, thanks so much for visiting with us. Certainly appreciate it.
Mike, love being on the show. Thank you.